This is a presentation of the Sports Source Digital Network, presented by Hearthside Bank.
Everything about the Vols you could ever want to know. This is the Ryan and Ollie Spring Football Show, and we've even got a silly AI theme song. Take it away, boys.
Welcome into the Spring Football Show here on the Sports Source Digital Network. Alongside VFL Ollie Lane, I'm Ryan Callahan of GoVols247.com. Got a lot to discuss about Tennessee spring football, as Tennessee is now 5 practices in, 9 to go, and the Vols are closing in on their first scrimmage of the spring. A lot of discussion about that today. Before we start, be sure to like and subscribe this channel. Give us a comment on the video as well. But if you want to see more of this type of content and everything else throughout the Sports Source Digital Network, be sure to like and subscribe. Ollie, Tennessee again getting ready for their first scrimmage. That's on Monday. They got back to practice on Tuesday coming off spring break. We want to talk about some of the guys that have the most to prove the rest of the way. We're 5 practices in. Tennessee's only had a couple in full pads, so we still don't know a lot. I'm not sure a lot has changed to this point. So we're still kind of where we were probably for the most part at the start of spring. Who has the most to prove over these next 3 weeks, especially leading into that first scrimmage on Monday? I guess let's start with the guy that probably be penciled into the starting lineup, but has a lot to prove.
Yeah, no, my number one on the list of things to prove, needs to prove who he is, the athlete that he is Chris Brazzell. Chris Brazzell came in last year, highly touted guy, huge expectations layered on him and what he was going to be able to do. Didn't get to see a lot of it last year. You know, obviously you had guys like Dante Thornton and Brew McCoy and Squirrel White that kind of took up a lot of the reps up there at wide receiver, but he's a guy that's super important to this offense, especially with how much the offense relies on big play opportunities. He's a guy that we got to get the ball in his hands. He's going to be able to generate and create big plays for us. But part of that is just getting him more familiarized with the system, getting him familiarized with the playbook. He needs to know it inside and out, needs to be on the same page with Nico so they can continue to have big connections over the top and stuff like that. So it's going to be exciting to see what he's going to be able to do this spring to solidify a good fall for him.
Might be number one on the list of guys with most to prove this spring, and just a guy that's got to take a step forward if this offense is going to be what they think it can be. And there's a history of guys in their second year in this program taking that jump, so they need him to be kind of the latest. I'll talk about some backups with my choices here. I'm going to go with Jake Merklinger at the quarterback position. Gaston Moore lost from last year. You've got 3 scholarship guys there now with George McIntyre, the talented freshman, also pushing Merklinger for that job. But Merklinger's second year in the program. He's well established now, but he hasn't gotten a lot of game time. So you need to see if he can be kind of that reliable, almost veteran now that behind Nico Iamaleava. If something happens, if he has to go out for any length of time, you need to have that second guy you can count on. McIntyre is a true freshman, might not be ideal to throw him in there right away, so the ideal scenario would be a second-year guy kind of taking that job and running with it. Can he do that this spring? I think Tennessee's coaches have always liked his skill set, thought he was a good fit for this system. Now he's got to show it, and he's got a big opportunity before Faison Brandon gets here, too. Let's not forget, if you're not the number 2 guy coming out of this year, this is the guy we might see in the transfer portal. So it's a big year for Jake Merklinger to show he can kind of hold off George McIntyre and then worry about Faison Brandon next year when he gets here.
Keeping it offensive-minded, next guy that I want to see a lot out of is Satterwhite. Satterwhite's projected right now, I believe, to be our starting center. And as everybody knows, that center position is so crucial to the success that an offense is going to be able to have. I mean, they're probably the second most important position behind your quarterback. And, I mean, that's even interchangeable at times. And so I think it's going to be very important to see what all he can handle this spring. Throw everything at him, everything in the kitchen sink. Make sure that he can handle the pressure, because you never know what the situation is going to be like when you step out there on a Saturday. I mean, defensive changes, everything you watched on tape one week might be completely different in the game. So you never know, and you want that center to have confidence every time that he's going out there that he can get everybody on the same page, because he's the one that's directing the show back there. Or up front. So, I mean, you need to make sure that he is the solid piece that you want at that center position.
And all the rest of the questions on that offensive line kind of start to fall into place once you figure out the center position for sure. I'm going to go with the secondary. I could have chosen a few guys here, but I'm going to go with Trey Poteet. He's the one that kind of maybe stands out to me, but there's a group of freshmen back there, Timothy Merritt, Ty Redmond, Dylan Lewis. They've got some guys that are in the mix, all kind of battling, jockeying for position this spring. They need someone from that group to step forward and show he's capable of playing, specifically at the cornerback position. So I'm going to go with Poteet. He's the son of a former NFL cornerback. Hank Poteet is now the cornerbacks coach at Iowa State. That gives him maybe an inherent advantage, I guess, in terms of just knowledge of the game and having the right mindset and everything, but someone from that group needs to show they're capable of contributing this season, because they don't have a lot of depth now, and they've moved Caleb Beasley, at least temporarily, to safety. So we'll see if one of those guys can emerge, but Poteet's one I'm watching to see if he can make the most of this spring and show he can be a guy that they can at least count on in a pinch.
Yeah, and then taking it back again to the offensive side, I'm going to talk about Lance Hurd. Everybody knows Lance Hurd. Started last year for us, played really well for us last year, but there were some times that I'm sure people would have other comments about his play. For one, I've seen a lot of promise out of him. He reminds me a lot of a young Darnell Wright. Darnell was not completely polished by the time that he finished, or by the time that he was starting to play for us. And he continued to develop throughout his time at Tennessee, and that's something that I want to see Lance continue to do. Continue to develop, become that leader on the offensive line now. As being the only returning starter, he really needs to step up in that role and be a voice for the guys, because he's going to be the one that's going to give the most insight on what they're going to be going against and what they could be looking at this year. So he's a guy that really needs to continue to step up not only his game, but also his leadership style and his progression into everything to become the full-fledged leader of that offensive line.
Right up there with Chris Brazzell, probably for a lot of fans.
Oh, yeah.
Someone that needs to take a step forward and that needs to protect Nico's blind side. Can't take that for granted. I'm going to go to a guy down the depth chart probably in a lot of people's minds, but getting a big opportunity this spring, Jordan Burns at linebacker, redshirt freshman. Didn't really get to see the field last year, had some injuries that he had to nurse when he got to campus, so was behind a little bit, but now he's getting a big chance this spring because of some guys being out. No Arion Carter out there, no freshman Jaden Harmon, no freshman Jaden Perlotti, so he's getting a lot of reps along with Edwin Spillman. I think we know Spillman's going to be a big part of the equation there. If Burns doesn't make the most of this spring, it starts to look bleak if those guys were to pass him on the depth chart. So I think he really needs to make the most of this spring to show that he can be part of this future, the future that Tennessee has at the linebacker position. So we'll see if he can make the most. Definitely an expanded opportunity, though, for getting a lot of reps over the next few weeks, along with Edwin Spillman and Jeremiah Thielander. Want to look specifically at this scrimmage, though, coming up. These are kind of big picture, not just about this scrimmage, but guys that just have a lot to prove in general. The first scrimmage is always a big, important kind of landmark on the spring schedule. You know that. It's where the depth chart maybe starts to fall into place if it's not already there. So we're obviously going to see this. We're a few days away from that. It's coming up on Monday. What would you like to see coming out of this first scrimmage, or hear about, because we're not going to see it. It's closed completely to media. So we have to take everyone at their word, hear what coaches and players have to say afterward. As a fan, what are you hoping to hear about? What developments do we need to see for this Tennessee football team coming out of this first scrimmage?
Yeah, I guess first thought is I'm going big picture here and mostly focused. Yes, I'm an offensive lineman. I'm going to talk about the offensive line. I want to focus on the offensive line, more importantly, your center and your offensive guard. Those are the two wide open positions that we really don't know about. Obviously, just talked about Satterwhite being that center position, but you also got guys like Sam Pendleton rolling in there and playing some center snaps. You got a guy, Max Anderson, as well, that played it last year for a touch and is continuing to get work there. So it's going to be interesting to see how that center scope actually plays out. And then it also plays into the construction of who's going to be your guards. Because if you got Sam Pendleton, you know, in the past it's been that left guard generally is the one that's going to slide over and take up your second string center with likes of me and Jerome Carvin in the past. So, I mean, that'll be interesting to see if that's a route that they go ahead and move on with, is having Pendleton be both a guard and a center at the same time. I think you've got a lot of good early impressions from Wendell Moe Jr. I think he's going to be a really strong force for us and super big asset. But then you also still got guys that have been in the program like Sham Umarov. Sham's been playing a really good ball since he's been here. He's continued to develop and get better. I mean, he's got the size. I mean, that guy's massive. So, I mean, that's another name that's going to be thrown out there. And, I mean, potentially you might even see some rotation done throughout the season, because it's something that people probably don't want to note right now. But there is depth in that offensive line. We just haven't seen them play a lot, so we don't know how good the quality of that depth is. But it's something that I'm definitely looking forward at the end of this spring scrimmage to see, all right, do we got a better understanding of who's actually going to be the ones that we're rotating in playing with come the fall.
I'm going to go to another position that we've already talked about a little bit, but two guys in particular that we didn't touch on as much in the Chris Brazzell discussion, Braylon Staley and Mike Matthews at wide receiver. Hard not to envision Tennessee having a good year if these two guys are pretty good. At the same time, Tennessee's offense has to have those guys step forward, and they're kind of unknowns right now as second-year players. So can Mike Matthews and Braylon Staley, I mean, they've got nothing but young guys, newcomers behind them. They've pretty much got to be starters unless they really fall on their face here. So Can they step forward and be the guys that we think they're capable of? Staley, a former top 100 prospect. Mike Matthews, a former 5-star, only caught 7 balls for 90 yards last season. Obviously, he was frustrated, almost went in the transfer portal. Big opportunity, but big expectations for both of those guys. If we don't hear about those guys catching a good number of passes in this scrimmage, probably not a great sign for Tennessee's passing game as a whole. They really need those two to start to emerge and take a step forward for this offense.
Yeah, another interest that I want to take in the spring scrimmage is a battle at right tackle. I know talking about offensive line, going to continue talking about offensive line, but this right tackle battles I think is starting to heat up a little bit. And these are obviously the two guys that I think you're going to see battling for that right tackle spot. I think Lance Erd's got left pretty secured. But Larry Johnson and David Sanders, I think, are going to be your top 2 guys to think about at playing that right tackle spot. Mm-hmm. Larry Johnson played a lot of good, consistent snaps last year, showed promise, showed some areas that he probably still needs a little bit work and development, but all in all, looks like he could be a really good player for us. Just he's got to continue to develop, continue to reshape his body, figure out how to become more athletic but still strong at the same time. But then you're throwing in this new wild card to David Sanders. And I mean, David Sanders is all the part of an SEC offensive lineman. When you look in the past at 5-star offensive linemen that come in, I mean, there's only one that comes to mind that was really day one ready to play, and that was Trey Smith. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, to have him in the same conversations with that is huge. And so I'm looking forward to see what he's going to continue to do. You know, they're putting him against some of the best that we got, and he's holding his own. And that's really promising for a freshman when you're also throwing at him the entire playbook and all this other stuff, class schedules, everything that could happen as a college freshman, and he's still holding his own. It's really impressive.
I would still pencil him in if I had to guess right now as the day one starter, but he's got to earn it. And Larry Johnson to me is really interesting. Played pretty well in that Oklahoma game last year, especially when he got a chance. So he looks better this offseason, to your point. He's already slimmed down a bit and looks a little more athletic. So right tackle, he's playing left tackle last year. Yeah. To be a right tackle feels a little more natural for him. I'm really interested in seeing how he does the rest of the spring. Another guy I'm watching in this scrimmage, maybe on both sides of the ball, Boo Carter. We've already gotten a little bit of a look at him on offense during the day. They gave us an extended viewing period for the media on the second day of spring practice. But I'm interested in seeing how much of a look they give him on offense. It's a day where they probably will give him a decent number of reps on defense. How much are they really prioritizing getting him in on offense? Is this just something where he's in there for 5 or 10 plays, or is this something that he really gets an extended look? And also, do they get him the ball every time he's in there? Even if he's only out there 5 or 10 plays in a game, if they're trying to get him the ball 2 or 3 of those plays, that might make a difference. So how much is he utilized, and what does that role look like? Because sometimes we've seen these part-time roles, and it's a token throw, a tunnel screen or whatever to a guy he doesn't have much room, and it's sort of a token look to a guy like, hey, let's get the ball in his hands and see if something happens. Okay, it didn't. Let's get him back out of there. So what actually does this role look like? He's still going to be the punt returner, you would assume. So just what does Boo Carter's scrimmage look like, but especially on offense, what do we see from him, and is this really something they might stick with going into the season? So this is just a sampling of what we'll be watching, but obviously a lot of things to discuss and continue to watch for this Tennessee football team going into Monday's scrimmage. And we'll be here next week to break it all down afterward, whatever we do get to hear coming out of that scrimmage. So for Ollie Lane, I'm Ryan Callahan. We'll see you back here next week.